We're going to have a very, very interesting discussion about blockchain, which is going to change and transform the travel industry. Anyone in this hall who's not listening, you're going to be impacted by it, and you're going to be really sorry that you were not listening. And I'm going to be giving you a test. I'm going to say a secret word, because I'm a big Groucho Marx fan, and we'll see whether you know that word, whether you've been listening. But I'm not going to say it yet. We've heard from Akbar, and I just wanted to allow Tiana just to introduce yourself before we get started.
Hi, guys. My name is Tiana Laurence, and I'm the Chief Marketing Officer for Factom, and I'm also one of the founders. And Factom's building enterprise blockchain software for governments and Fortune 500. So.
Thank you. Appreciate it. And thank you, Akbar, for interesting presentation. I wanted to just make sure we're all on the same page. I recently completed an article, actually, for the Focusrite Innovation Edition, and the opportunity to actually interview both Tiana and Akbar. Not yet. I don't think it's been released yet, but it's imminent on blockchain. Now, I do a lot of research around technology. It took me a while to really get my arms around what this is. So you may think you know what this is. You probably think you know what Bitcoin is, especially those who use Bitcoin. But I want to start before we really dig into how this is going to change the travel industry to make sure we're clear on what we're talking about. You can probably just do a simple Google search and find many, many articles which basically say one thing. Bitcoin, not so sure whether it's going to have an impact. I think the jury's out. Some feel like it's still going to be very important. Others feel like it's never going to really be mainstream. Blockchain, JP Morgan Chase, IBM, I can go on. Every mainstream financial institution and technology company is either working on something with blockchain or is actively, investigating it and implementing it. But why is that happening? It's happening because we're in a situation where these folks, many of them in the financial markets, are what? They're middlemen. That's how they make their money. What is the benefit of blockchain? I'm being very simplistic here. It cuts out the middleman. How many middlemen do we have in the travel industry? I couldn't even start naming everyone. Everyone takes a cut. And if you're thinking about your startup, you've got to realize that your startup also may be another middleman. And guess who doesn't like that? The same folks that Akbar was talking about, the suppliers. And when we get into the discussion around this, think about that. The other thing that I've heard from startups very frequently over the years is the frustration about the infrastructure, how archaic the infrastructure is in the travel industry. And we heard that a few times this morning. Blockchain is potentially the next generation platform. So we're talking about something not minor. We're not talking about Bitcoin. We're talking about an infrastructural change that could eliminate the middlemen in travel. This is pretty significant. So now all I'm going to ask is how? No. I know that each of you have had some experience in the travel industry. So I'd like you just to start a little bit about kind of broad examples of travel industry players or travel implementations where you've used blockchain in order to really change, or you are talking to folks within the travel industry about using blockchain. So just some examples to begin with.
Okay. So I grew up in Aspen, Colorado, which is the whole town's economy is based off of tourism. And one of my first jobs was working in a hotel and at a resort. And one of the problems was we would get our reservations in on our fax machine, and sometimes we wouldn't have any hotel rooms to put the person in. And Aspen's one of these places you got to drive at least 3 hours, or you fly in, and then you can't leave. You can't leave, and there might not be a place for that person to sleep. I had nights where like I had to have like people like put out cots in our basement just so people wouldn't freeze. So that's called a double spin problem when you overbook yourself. Now, something that blockchains can allow is for that not to occur. So once a transaction goes in and it updates the system, then you can't like do that again. You can see that there's no room left at the end. So I think that's one of the interesting things that blockchains can do that's pretty straightforward. But there's a lot of other places in the travel industry that I think it'll affect it that you guys might not even be aware of. So,
And we'll go through each of those segments.
Yeah, I think there are many kind of examples of looking forward. But I think for today, my biggest thing is fax machines and getting rid of them. And so if you think about we have OTAs that actually use our platform today. They don't touch the blockchain. In fact, it's almost like when you do an email, you don't touch the SMTP server. You don't even know. And that's how they look at it. They're like, I don't want to know how you do it. I just want to know that my money gets there. And that's what we take care of. And I think that's how a lot of blockchain will happen. It will be there. It will solve many problems. But as a consumer, I'm not sure that you will be impacted directly. I think booking flow and making sure the booking process is better will be one area where I think blockchain will make a big difference.
Okay. So some of the areas I like to focus in on are really pain points in the travel industry. I think the number one thing that I have kind of equated blockchain perhaps solving is fraud. And in fact, when I was writing this piece, I had trouble finding out the single number of the amount of fraud that we have in the travel industry, but it's definitely in probably the multi-billions worldwide. And so tell me how blockchain helps the travel industry reduce fraud.
Is the Hotwire, people from Hotwire still here? Yeah. So you should ask them kind of how big fraud is. Today, it may not be that big, but I remember in the 90s, about 15% of transactions that were happening on Hotwire were fraudulent, and they had to detect and fight against that. I'm sure they've got a lot better, otherwise they wouldn't be around. But with Bitcoin or even any crypto, and I use Bitcoin and blockchain kind of synonymously, and I think I'm a little biased. I think that, we can talk about that separately. But to answer the question directly there, in blockchain transactions in Bitcoin, you cannot reverse that transaction. So it's not like I can put a credit card number and it's a fake number and I find out 5 days later. So because you cannot reverse this transaction, I think it reduces the amount of fraud to a very, very low number.
I would add to that a little bit. So the idea is that with a cryptocurrency, it's a one-way payment. You can't recall the payment. So if somebody sends it out, they have the funds. They either have the funds or they don't have the funds. So you don't have to worry about chargebacks on credit cards or checks that don't cash. But beyond like the payment process, there's also an identity piece that I think in the near future we'll see that identity of people and also the travelers themselves knowing that the place that they're going to, if it's more exotic, actually exists and that they're actually booking with the people that they think they are. So.
Okay. I just want to get clarification on something you said in your presentation, because you were referring to it kind of like a password. It's much more complex as far as the encryption than a password. Passwords get hacked constantly. And can you maybe just comment on, from the technology side, what level of encryption is in the blockchain that prevents it from being hacked? Because I'm sure if we're talking about fraud, it's like, well, that can be hacked too, right? Just because it's permanent, let's just hack it, and we'll get in there and alter, do something about fraudulent transactions with blockchain.
I think there are a couple of PhDs who spend a lifetime talking about that. But yeah, no, look, I think it is more than just a password. The private key itself could be thought of as a password, but the way the whole blockchain infrastructure works is that it has a tree of all transactions, the entire ledger. And this entire ledger kind of builds on itself. So you can't necessarily just say, hey, I'm going to build my own ledger, and I'm going to create my own copy as a hotel and say, hey, all that money that you're sending to all the hotels, it's mine now, right? So you can't just do that. You have to build an entire history. Not only that, every time that transaction happens, multiple computers have to confirm that transaction happened. And once those confirmations have taken place, it's hard to reverse that even more. And then you take all of these transactions and you put them into this one block, i.e. the blockchain. And so you take this entire chain of transactions, you put it in one block, and then you kind of assign, a reward for finding that block through a very strong cryptographic calculation. And whoever finds out the secret of this block being, a complete block wins a token. And in the Bitcoin blockchain, it's Bitcoin. And in other blockchains, it's other tokens, other coins. And so that's kind of there's a significant infrastructure, and I can talk for hours on that, but it is not just a password, so that's a good point there.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify that. I wanted to build, Tiana, on the identity situation you were talking about, because you and I had an interesting pre-conference discussion around the airport, and I was wondering if you can share that with the audience as far as identity. Again, not immediate, but what could be the future and things you've been talking about with the airlines on.
So blockchain is a very, very new technology. Even though it's the thing that keeps a record of all the transactions on Bitcoin, it's the idea that you can actually build applications on top of that, and identity and chains of identity. So as far as how new this is, think about last year, most people didn't really know what it was, and it takes them about a year to understand, what this is, and let's see if we can actually do something interesting with it. So at this stage, we're in early testing. So you come up with an idea that you want to test around, and then you start building around that test. And then over the next 18 months, we'll see whether or not those ideas that we have around it are actually working. Now, given that I've prefaced this, let me tell you about some of the stuff that we're thinking about testing and are in the process of testing. So identity. Right now, if I showed you guys my passport, it would show that I am myself, and it was issued by a certificate authority, a government, that says that I am this person. But the reality is, you don't know that I didn't have that printed down the street an hour ago. So blockchains get to have this idea around time, that it existed in that format and belonged to me at that given point in time. So in 10 years, you could say, okay, I've had this passport and this identity for 10 years, and here's all these other people that have corroborated that that is my identity. Not just the original certificate authority, the government, but maybe a bank that also checked, and maybe somebody else, here's my biometrics, something else. Who knows? It can have all these attributes that are connected to it in a chain throughout history that's always connected to me. And you could have it be permission, so you could have people that could connect other interesting information to it, or you could depermission them, cut them off so they could no longer have access to it. So a one-time key. So it becomes really, really interesting as far as what that will look like in the future. I don't know all the implications of that, but it's an identity that is going to be more difficult possibly to forge or change. And I don't know all the social implications of that, but I know that governments are very, very interested in that. And we're currently working on a project around building identity for things, so IoT devices. But the context of that is that once you can establish an identity for a thing, let's call it a smartphone, for example, that has geolocation, it has all these other things that are connected to it just the way a person is, then you can start building identity for people. I've had conversations with other governments that I won't name that want to start doing it with people now. Let's see, what else? Another interesting thing would be the idea, if you can do this identity piece, once you can test that identity piece works, then you can start authenticating people before. So in the travel scenario, you're getting on an airplane and you're going someplace. So with your phone, they know that your phone's connected to you and you're traveling to, they already know that you're going to the airport. They can begin authenticating you before you even walk onto the plane. So I had a conversation with an airport that wants to have the possibility of authenticating and going through the whole check-in process without you even breaking stride. You just walk through the airport, no more TSA stopping you in the line, none of that. You just keep on going, and they've already checked you. They already know everything about you, and it's less intrusive way of checking you. So that's the way we look at blockchain technology. It's around data, and it's around securing data, not moving money faster.
You know, I have to tell you that that was very intriguing to me because I did a report a couple of years ago about the airport of tomorrow, and the vision that the airports and airlines have is this seamless system of just walking through and not really being stopped. And we are in the exact opposite right now. We are into airport congestion and TSA saying here in the U.S. that it's not going to get better, it's going to get worse. And so it's an interesting thing. And I think that, you know, the possibility of it increasing travel, if we could solve this problem, and that is beneficial to everyone in this room, because the more travel and tourism we have, the better experiences we're going to have for the people who are really doing the infrastructure. So the other thing which is interesting about the travel industry is the settlement process. We have a lot of people who have their kind of finger in the pie, so to speak, with settlement, a lot of fees associated with it, and also a lack of instantaneous payment on some levels. I mean, so the airlines get pretty quick payment through their banks, through credit cards. There are some things in place right now. But given whether it's hospitality or other sectors, where do you see settlement changing with blockchain? How does blockchain, I'll ask you this, Akbar, as far as how does blockchain change settlement?
I just want to echo first something that Tiana said, which is it's true that it's more than just payments. And I want to clarify that I do think that blockchain could be used for many things. I think payments is one that has taken off significantly. And the reason is it allows you to do transfers in real time. And for those who don't know, settlement is really when that money comes back into our account. So if a hotel took you as a customer, you know, when do they see the money? Generally 3 to 7 days after, depending on the country they're in. Well, with blockchain, it could be real time. And, you know, maybe everyone in the world will start using blockchain, you know, and Bitcoin and Ethereum and all the other possibilities, and, you know, settlement will be reduced to almost nothing. But I think what's really more likely is that even if 1% starts using it, you know, the Visa and MasterCard will start feeling the pressure to reduce that settlement time down to 0. So even if we don't see a complete adoption, I think, you know, having some competition to the current infrastructure will bring the settlement times down to 0.
That's great. Now we also have this settlement process specific to the travel industry, where there are actually settlement houses. For airlines, it's the ARC. There's outside the U.S., there's basically BSPs, settlement places where kind of tickets flow. And it's most for airline tickets, it's mostly when there are multiple airlines on a given itinerary on one single ticket. That's where things have to be settled up. So it appears to me, and I just am asking for what your opinion is, that could also change. Is that if there is a way to use blockchain to allow airlines to settle with each other, that we may actually eliminate the need for a clearinghouse. Does that seem to make sense from your perspective?
So what blockchains do is they allow two parties that don't innately trust each other to work with each other without having to trust. They call it a trustless system. So that's why a blockchain is different than like your typical database, in which case you need to trust all parties that participate in it. So that's why I think that it would be effective and why many different parties can participate in it. And I think that anything is really possible. And this is just kind of like the beginning, and I'm not smart enough to know all the different ways that it will change the world in 10 years kind of situation.
Well, I will add to that I don't know about the settlements between airlines, that may or may not happen, but the whole concept of a ticket, you know, a ticket is something of value. You know, and there I can't make a photocopy of a ticket and go to an airline and say, I have a copy, I can sit on here. So it is something that, you know, is limited in quantity and that, you know, is not necessarily easily transferred between people, but it is transferred from airline to you. So I could imagine that along with the identity piece, you could get a ticket information where you just walk in and the ticket is authenticated using the same blockchain. So I could imagine the ticketing process just disappearing, where you may not even need the settlement to begin with.
That's very interesting. Well, I would have to say, when we talk about the travel industry and lack of trust, there is a lot of lack of trust between the, let's just say, the current intermediaries and the suppliers, and who owns the customer, how things get paid, and so forth. And so it is an interesting angle here with blockchain, possibly adding some value there. The other thing, though, that we have in the travel industry, which is probably not unique, but seems to be really something that the average person outside the industry doesn't realize, is an awful lot of strange money flows. People within the travel industry get paid for using technology rather than having to pay for technology. And where that comes from is also very odd. It's coming from suppliers. And so we have this parent and child relationship between the airlines and the global distribution systems of GDS that was a very unhappy delusion of the agreement, that they don't like each other very much. They feel like, and there's lawsuits around their relationships as far as fees. Because fees flow in different ways. And one of the challenges, you talk about OTAs spending billions of dollars to maintain their market position, or large TMCs doing that, and forgive me for the folks who work for either of those companies in the room, but each of those companies are making millions and millions of dollars on fees that are not transparent because they're all negotiated privately. They're all back-end overrides or sharing through GDS segment fees. So I realize you can't talk about industry specific, but in general, how do you see blockchain improving the transparency of transactions? That's really the point. Long-winded way of asking a question, forgive me.
In a general sense, because I've been educating executives from all different industries for about the last year, and a lot of them first were very terrified by the idea that blockchain was going to displace them, was going to start eating away at their ability to make money. And then they realized that it's not really like blockchain, like that's a type of I would just call it like a type of database. They could run their own. And so that's when you started hearing more about these ideas of private or permission blockchains. They're like, we could have our own. So I think that in these cases where you're going to start stealing people's cheese, as they say, like they'll find other ways. Like these guys have the money and resources to protect or evolve. And that's what I'm seeing in the financial industry and in government, is they're like, well, we'll just, instead of like resistance, because that's kind of futile, like let's embrace it and find ways to incorporate it and make more money. Like that's what they're good at. So that's how I see it.
I think you just called the banks the board, but it's okay. Star Trek reference. Go ahead.
I need one of those like Google glasses.
Yeah.
So, if you could comment. So again, how does it change the settlement process? Was the question.
So I think we'll probably disagree. Right? I think that there's a lot of fragmentation in this industry, which is why you just can't go direct, and everyone's kind of in the middle taking a piece of the pie. And that is exactly why you hear this permission blockchains, because everyone wants to protect their piece of pie. Well, the fact is, right? Imagine this, and I'll take you back again in the 90s. If you could only email to people on AOL or only on Earthlink. It did happen for a while, but that didn't last long, right? And I think the same thing happens here, where you have a distributed network. The way it becomes stronger is kind of how many nodes you add to it. And the more open and public you keep it, the more nodes you can add faster, the stronger it's going to become. So I don't think that permission blockchains is how these companies will actually maintain their power and their grip. I think the only way they will actually be able to maintain that is by adding real value. So if they are adding a real discovery value, they will maintain it. Otherwise, people will go find a way to go direct, and there will be many companies like ours that will just go straight to the hotels and say, why don't you just take it direct? So I think that, I think that if these companies want to stay in business and they want to kind of charge, then they have to add value and not just be a middleman.
To add to that, just because I know you guys aren't all deep in blockchain, I like to categorize blockchain into like 3 different classes. So there are blockchains, so their own distributed network that have a cryptocurrency Bitcoin, Ethereum, Ripple, and a few others. The more nodes you have, the stronger your network, the more secure it is. And then there are things called side chains. So you use these fancy things called Merkle trees. They've been around since I think the 70s. You take a lot of data and you squish it down to a little bit of data using hashes. So hash is like a digital fingerprint of any amount of data. So you take, let's say, like a gig, and you can get it all the way down to 32 characters. And then you can peg that inside of Bitcoin or Ethereum or Ripple or really any blockchain. And that's a way of securing information. And then there's hybrids, which is a combination of both. So you have a smaller network, and then you use Merkle trees and hashes to then secure yourself in larger networks. So that way you can work more efficiently, but without the same sort of, like, I would call it overhead as you would with other ones. So that's what Factom actually does, is it allows for that, and it allows a lot of data to be in, but it's also the thing that would allow private blockchains to be able to have the same sort of security as a big network.
That's very interesting. So the last subject before we open up to Q&A, I wanted to talk about is loyalty, because we all have seen how loyalty has kind of become a bit of a currency. So you can use loyalty to buy stuff on Amazon. You can buy all sorts of merchandise with your frequent flyer points or so forth. But it seems like from what we've talked about that there's actually even a different role loyalty may play because of the instantaneous nature of blockchain. So I was wondering if you could talk about that a little bit. Where do you think blockchain and loyalty is going to play?
Okay, so I think loyalty programs are really interesting on blockchains because they would allow parties to exchange loyalty points. There's a lot of people that are interested in that, about creating their own exchanges with blockchain. I think that's pretty cool. I don't know a ton about it. We've had a lot of interesting conversations. I think that's just kind of like one segment.
Yeah, same way. I think loyalty by definition is one entity and its own points, and it's centralized. And blockchain is all about being decentralized. So it's really hard to put loyalty on the blockchain. And I think it's too early to know how that whole sidechain piece and it will work and it will connect to the loyalty. So I think it will happen. It's too early. I don't have a reason to understand how that could happen today.
Well, one of the things we were talking about on the pre-call was that the idea that you can be on the plane and immediately get your loyalty credited. And then if you had some type of disservice, there could be extra loyalty points added that could be used in exchange for services. And so I think that was what I was thinking about more in the immediate term.
Yeah, I think if you abstract the loyalty points, or however you want to denote it, into like a cryptocurrency or something like that, it would be like the trading of that. And then there's many platforms that trade between different types of cryptocurrency. There's so you could go from your airline miles and switch them off to like Wells Fargo points on your credit card or something like that, because there would be some kind of exchange rate value. So like you don't have enough airline points to get on enough of the different airlines, because I don't know about you guys, I'm not very loyal. I just want to fly on the best seat I can. So I have like all these different loyalty programs, but if I could I've been on the road so much, and all I had was like 6,000 points from American, but I really wanted to upgrade. It would have been wonderful to be able to scrape all the ones from United and Virgin and allocate them so I could get that first class seat. So I think that's very possible to build, and something that could probably be built in the next 18 months, but I don't know anybody that's doing that right now.
So I just wanted to close before we ask the audience for some input. And one of the frustrating things about anything that we're talking about today is trying to understand, considering the balancing of how fast technology is moving and how much, especially in our industry, there's a lot of, let's say, gumming up the works. Things just don't seem to move as quickly as we would like in the travel industry. So just from a pure kind of blockchain expertise, not expecting you to know the travel industry, what do you think is going to be the most visible evidence of blockchain, say, in the next 2 years and then in the next 5 years, from it, not necessarily from consumer awareness, as you say, you don't need to know the machine behind things, but from kind of, again, making the back end better? Only predict the future. It's
So I'm
okay.
just looking at my crystal ball. I do think that payments has made a long way. I think being able to simplify their operations will definitely be one of those. I think that what would be even more interesting than that, as far as kind of the impact to the consumers, will be discovery. If the hotels or all the different tours were on the blockchain, so that instead of going to every single GDS and connecting and getting the data to be able to build some cool app on top of it, it'd be nice if I could just go to the blockchain and get it. And I do see that happening. I don't know if it's 18 months or 5 years, but I do see some early movement there, but it's still way too early to kind of predict timeline. I think, the way I look at it is, think about AI, right? It was going to be done in 10 years and it's still not. I think blockchain is going to be the same way. It will be done next year, and then the year after, and the year after. So,
Venture to
I like
crystal ball?
I like the idea that the future is here, it's just not distributed. So some of the interesting trends I've seen is massive amounts of people entering the middle class. I was recently in South Africa, and Barclays is pulling out of Africa. And they're pulling out because they'll save money by cutting. But the reality is, like, the people down there that I talk to, they're like, this is insane. We got over 30,000 people entering the middle class, like, all the time. Like, how are we supposed to service all these people that are going to need, like, modern banking? And if they have disposable income, they're going to be traveling more. And if the world feels a little bit safer, people will be traveling those places more. So, like, in the long run, like, the real vision is, like, everyone can move the different places that they want to go. There aren't the kind of, like, the reason that we have controls is for, like, safety and protectionism and things like that. But if you can reduce those fears, because you can really identify people and know whether or not they're harmful or not, like, those things can go away. So one of the governments that's really interesting right now is Estonia. Does anybody know where Estonia is? Good, okay, just checking. I didn't for a long time. They are working on this program called e-residency. Now, what e-residency does is it doesn't give you a passport to Europe. It allows you to be authenticated by a government that you're not a nefarious individual. You can operate a European business. You can operate European bank accounts. So I could see a program like that. Like, they have massive ambitions. Right now, they have 10,000 people in their program, and they want to have 10 million. And they're targeting countries where there's restriction on travel and commerce and things like that. So if you could start dividing up the people, the nefarious people from the not nefarious people, and then free them up economically, then that becomes really, really interesting. Another thing that we're working on is securing the underlying assets around developing countries. So once you could secure the land, you can take a dead asset and turn it into something that's more liquid. So instead of having to own a property outright and not knowing whether or not you own that property, sorry, I'm kind of going off, but it'll come around. What that does is it frees up people's ability to spend money, and it helps people improve on their economies. So instead of having, like, whole societies where you can't go buy, like, I wouldn't go buy a beautiful beachfront property in Colombia because I don't know whether or not I'd actually own it. But in the future, you will. And once you know that you can buy these beautiful beachfront properties, like, what will that do to these economies where you have beautiful beaches and beautiful places to go, but it's too dangerous or too insecure to go there? So that's what I really, like, that's why I work on this project.
Okay, I think that we're pretty short of time.
Actually, we're going to do a bio break for the next 5 minutes, but we can continue questions because I'm sure there's quite a few. So if anyone needs to take a bio break, we'll start our next segment in 5 minutes.
Okay, any questions?
Okay. Given this is part of hi, thanks. I really want to understand the big picture of the blockchain because it's very new concept to me. So I really want to know, first of all, like, what's the problem of the current database? And will the blockchain is a technology replace the whole thing, the current one, or it's a one will evolve, like build on it?
I'll take take a stab at that one. So, blockchain is part of a software stack. It's part of what makes already existing things just work better. The internet is built in stacks, and this is just an additional stack to that. So you don't have to rebuild your systems. You can use API calls and all of a sudden give your existing system a blockchain backend. Some stuff will need to be rewritten, but it's not like you're going to have to go out and, like, hotels spend hundreds of thousands of dollars on their existing software. You don't have to, and years to adopt new software. You don't have to go do that. You can just take your existing stuff and make it a little bit more secure. So I think that's how it's going to look, but if you have a different opinion.
No, I mean, remember, they still use a fax machine. So at the end of the day, I think the technology that they have will continue to use. We will continue to use it. I think blockchain is just an addition to it. So I agree.
Given that the blockchain is a big part of the travel future, who's going to make it happen? Is it going to be the large computer companies? Is it going to be the actual suppliers and travel businesses themselves? Or is it going to be a couple of really sharp startups that are going to change the world?
Startups.
Funded by large corporations and governments. I think it's a group effort. It was like the internet. There was a few key people that spun it up, but then once people saw how much value it was bringing, more and more people connected to it and brought more and more value.
I actually do hold it. That I think innovation can't come from big companies, just because at the end of the day they have a business to run, and if they were to innovate, then who's going to run the business? So I do think that startups have a place, and I think a lot of the innovation will come from startups that will eventually just look pretty big. So.
Hi. So I guess my question might be a little more Bitcoin cryptocurrency focused, and maybe a little bit more for Tiana from her experience. But I'm curious about how many of the clients and people that you're working with, if, for example, governments, are they embracing the idea of Bitcoin, or are they more fighting it? Because at least examples, you look at South America, you look at Colombia, they've outlawed it. You look at Argentina, the black market, Venezuela, people are using it to make purchases that they really can't because of government regulations. So I'm curious about the response to all this.
That's a great question. What I've learned in the last year working with large companies and governments is that it's not a single individual and it's not a single mind. There are people that are crazy about cryptocurrency, crazy about Bitcoin, crazy about blockchain, and there's people that just hate it, and they can be in the same organization and in the same team. So I think it's like any kind of innovation. There are people that are your early adopters and innovators that were the first to see that this had value, and then the other people are like, this is a giant waste of time, and why are we doing this? And I don't want to do it. So it's a mixed bag. And I think overall, like if you're looking at how it's changing, I think it went from like resistance, let's make it go away, to, oh, we can use this and do more with this and have more control than we had before. So that's my general impression. Everybody from, the DOD down to, your Wells Fargos and things like that. So.
Okay, so question, you talked a lot about identity and how blockchain enables the historical trace and how it makes it easier for government, and then government like the idea. But there is an opposite side of that, right? People's privacy. And here, from this perspective, we know there are already problems with that, especially with the internet and cloud-based solution. And from this perspective, blockchain looks like it makes it even harder and more scary for people. So can you talk about what do you think from this perspective? How will be a fight between privacy and blockchain will find solutions based on the blockchain will find their way how to still respect people's privacy but benefit their ecosystem, society, and governments?
That's a great question. So the idea around Bitcoin and blockchain and that concept is that once you publish something, it never goes away. So if I wanted to spend the money to publish a picture of my passport, it would live there forever, ever. And it would also lose its value because then I could no longer use it. I'd need to go get a new one with a new number and stuff. So you don't want to, I don't think people want to use it raw. Like, you don't want to use blockchain raw. You want some of the abilities of it, but having really interesting technology that's built on top of it. So this idea around like keys and being able to permission them or have like one-time use, I think that's really interesting. And if the identity belongs to the individual and they can decide who gets to look at it and how long they get to look at it. I mean, people should have the right to be forgotten. The idea around your credit report that, you know, if you go bankrupt, I think it's 7 years. But in the internet age, like that stuff, it never goes away and it'll follow you forever. And we're just starting to realize that. And I think actually that's why maybe people pull away from social media now once you realize that your employers and your friends, and as you change, you know, from being a 15-year-old to a 25-year-old to a 30-year-old, like you don't want the crazy things you did as a teenager to affect who you are when you're applying for grad school. So, yeah.
I just want to add one more piece to it. I think from an identity perspective, you know, right now, when you go to open a bank account, you take your credit card with you, and they need to see it. They make a copy of it, and they put it in, you know, in the back. But the only reason they do that is because that's the only way they can verify you. But imagine if all they had to do is say, "Hey, this person's on, you know, on my door. Can I open an account? Yes or no?" And the government authority that issues the ID just says yes or no. They don't need to keep information from you. Government already knows who you are. They already have the identity. The company doesn't need to know. The company just wants to do business with you. So I think it'd be almost opposite, where I think we will be able to do a lot more, just because every company is not going to need to store all this personal information because it's already on the blockchain, and the authorization to open this account is already on the blockchain.
I want to quick add to that just a little bit. So, you know, when you go to the bar and you are asked to show your ID to get into the club or whatever like that. Like, they don't need to know your address or your weight or what state you're from. They just need to know that you're okay to go in there. Not even like how old you are. They don't need to know any of that information. They just need like a green check mark, okay to go. So I think that's what's possible with a blockchain. You can use that kind of aspect with identity. So it actually, I think life could be more private and people only given the information that they need at the moment that they need it.
And I'm going to do a last call for bio break before we start our next presentation in 2 minutes. We have 2 more questions with Maddie over here.
Yeah, Tiana, earlier you mentioned the using blockchain encryption for ensuring you have a canonical inventory of reservations, or preventing double booking, so to speak. Yep. Are there any other examples you've stumbled across of using blockchain for more of the logistical purpose within tourism and less about financial?
Are you talking about like supply chain management and things like that? Or?
Sure, it's everything other than finances. I mean,
basically anything you can do with a database, you can do with a blockchain. It's a clunky database, so this, your imagination is the limit. And it's a database that you can then share without having to trust others. And there's a lot of different ways you can configure it that's really interesting. So if you have something like specific that you want to, come meet me in the back of the room and we can chat, and if you have an idea that you want to see if it fits inside of a blockchain. So.
Does anyone know what the Federal Reserve System is doing with blockchains and cryptocurrency?
What they're doing with it?
Yeah.
I can say what they're not doing with it. So the way, just for people's knowledge, the way Federal Reserves work is when 2 banks transfer money, right? The Federal Reserve has GL accounts, and they say, okay, we'll call you guys even, and then the settlement party could do it next day because you still owe the money. And the way the federal governments work with each other is they also have accounts with a central clearing organizations. There are companies like CLS and it's BIS that really do the same thing that the Federal Reserve does within a country between different Federal Reserves. And so you have this massive infrastructure built all the way from small banks all the way to the central governments, and all the transfers are done the same way around the world, and it's through clearing between different Federal Reserves. We've actually talked to quite a few of those guys in terms of, how do we simplify that? And clearly, yes, they could use the blockchain. But at the end of the day, that is a very long process. I mean, I think you're talking about trying to get every bank on board, and there are challenges. They wanted to go, and ACH is a payment method in the US, and it takes about a couple days to find out whether the money actually made it through or not. And they've been trying to get that to same day, and it's taken at least about 10 years. So, so they're very kind of realistic in a sense of what they can accomplish, and that it's going to take quite some time. So they are interested, but I think that's kind of where they are right now.
Okay, well, we have to close out. I want to thank Tiana and Akbar. I did owe you a secret word. It is BC Future, and it's not Burger King or spelled with a C. So BC Future. So that means you've been listening. We appreciate your time and your attention. Interesting subject, very complex, something to keep your eyes on. Thank you.
Thank you, Norm, Akbar, and Tiana. Let's have a round of applause.